Singing Dutchman Productions. Hello and welcome to Doug's Front Porch, a podcast where I get to sit down with friends, old and new, and have honest conversations. Today I welcome Gretchen Swank onto the front porch, a relatively newer friend and someone that I'm really looking forward to getting to know a lot better in this conversation. Gretchen, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I always like to start off all my episodes kind of the same way. Tell the audience a little bit about where were you born? Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? What kind of things were you into as a kid? Stuff like that.
Okay, well, I was born and raised in Altoona, Pennsylvania, so Blair County, and I was raised in the outdoors. My family, every weekend we go camping and sailing. I belonged in a sailing club, and I was raised kind of running around in the woods, hiking, sailing, really connecting to nature. And I was into sports and stuff in school and typical things that kids were into. And but every summer we spent the time in the mountains near Altoona, right, like in Crescent area. So that's where we spent our summers as a family. I was raised we were Pennsylvania Dutch. So it was, that was very much a part of, the culture in which I was raised. It was just part of who I was and who I became. It wasn't something we talked about. It was just something that we were. So,
We're going to come back to that a lot in this conversation because a couple things strike me right off the bat. You know, you're born and raised in central Pennsylvania in the Blair County region, which for most Pennsylvania Dutch people, that's kind of out of our territory. That's like the hinterlands, and it's not typical necessarily to find people that identify as Pennsylvania Dutch once you get out into that part of Pennsylvania. So I find that really interesting that you had that connection growing up where you did. And also sounds like as a kid, man, to be outdoors as much as you were, that sounds pretty idyllic in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was great.
So one of the reasons that I wanted to invite Gretchen on was because recently she wrote a piece that we want to talk about. But before we get there, let's tell the audience your journey. So you had this childhood in the outdoors and high school, etc. What did you do after school was over?
Well, after high school, I went to Penn State University, and I moved to State College when I was 20, and went to Penn State main campus. I attended Altoona campus for a couple of years and came down to Maine. I studied journalism and English, and I really had an interest in studying different world religions because I was raised Catholic in Catholic school, and to Catholic grade school and high school. So I was really ready to branch out and study something different, learn a different perspective. And so I studied a lot of different world religions and different cultural perspectives in college. I really enjoyed my time here. So I moved back to State College, Center County, as soon as I could after college. After college, I went into the Pennsylvania State Police Academy and became a Pennsylvania State Trooper. Spent 20 years working as a state trooper. I was a criminal investigator, worked primarily child sexual abuse investigations for the majority of my career. So I found a lot that work very healing and rewarding, being able to help others in that way. It was very difficult work. So
Okay, I didn't know that about you. So I
you
want to
didn't?
talk a little. No, I didn't. I want to
Okay.
talk a little
I
bit
thought
about
you
that.
did.
No, I
Okay.
didn't. So gosh, what a job. So you weren't necessarily out in the car getting speeding tickets and things like that. You were
Early in
put
my
into this
career, I was.
early. You were okay. How
Mhm.
difficult was it at that time for you as a woman going into the state police academy?
Oh, it was a very difficult environment. But there's very few women on the job. It's like 4% of the ranks of the state police are actually women. The numbers may be a little bit higher now, might be up to like 10%. Last time I checked, but I retired a couple of years ago, so I don't know what the numbers are now. But yeah, it's a difficult field for a woman. Even when I went in 2002, it was still very much a man's world. But I really wanted to do the job. My dad was a police officer, uh, and I really respected what he did. And he had a really great personality. Like I would meet people who he arrested or helped, and they'd be like, "Oh, your dad's a great guy. He arrested me." You know? But like it was about how you treated other people, and helped other people, no matter which um, side it was on, because a very healing attitude about the work and about interacting with others. And I wanted to help children in the way that I was able to hone my career.
Yeah, how did that work out? So you graduated from the academy. Were you allowed to then say, "Hey, I'd really like to get into that specific type of job with the state police"?
Yeah, well, you have opportunities to take specialized training through our different training academies. So we have a few across the state. And so I uh, really took a lot of trainings to help me obtain the job of a criminal investigator. I tested a couple of times, and then eventually I was able to get into that job. And I spent the majority of my career as a criminal investigator. Then the rest of my career, I never left that job. I really enjoyed working. It was really difficult, but I really enjoyed being able to help kids in that way. I had, I'll say, a special way about it, but I was really able to connect with kids and be useful and helpful in that way.
Well, you have to have certain abilities and gifts in order to do that type of job and to go into
Yeah.
the situations that you were going into. How did you I mean, some of the stories had to be horrific.
Oh yeah.
How did you deal with that? Like how do you put your boots on every day knowing that you're going to be continually walking into situations like that?
Yeah. Oh, it's difficult. It's a lot of self-care. That's really what brought me back. Well, when I was in college, I was doing a lot of meditation and yoga and running and things like that in my studies of different world cultures and religions. So it really brought me back to that. I started really getting into meditation and yoga, and that's what to do the self-care on the side outside of my work. And that's what brought me into back to um, self-centering, self-care, and I was running a lot, meditating, going out into nature a lot, reconnecting to that part of myself because that's how I was raised. So hiking, I was taking my son out hiking a lot, spending time in the woods, really connecting to nature because that's so healing, especially in our culture. It's connecting to the natural world, and so that was really helpful. But yeah, it was a little overwhelming sometimes to do that work. Uh,
Because I would imagine part of the job would lead to, I mean, there was trauma, of course, of hearing these stories and then having to investigate them. But I would imagine also an aspect of anger too. How can you not, invest yourself in these kids and not be harbor some kind of anger towards the people that did these atrocious acts? So yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I'm glad you had figured out a way to decompartmentalize that stuff and find places that you could keep healthy both mentally and emotionally and spiritually too.
yeah. I mean, you would have to. I mean, I would have to interview the children, and sometimes we would take them, especially later in my career, once the children's advocacy centers opened up. We had specialized interviewers to help with that, but I still would do a lot of the interviews myself. So interviewing the children was one process and one way of interaction and relating to um, a person, of different, of trauma and that sort of thing. And then you'd have to turn around and interview the suspect, and it's taking a whole entire different approach. And some of the guys would be like, I don't know how you, like, you have to, play that role and know how their brain works. There's a lot of psychology involved in that. So, it was a lot of, kind of mental judo of doing that work. So,
Do you miss it?
no. Not at all.
Fair enough question. But
I,
some people,
I did
when they
my time.
some people when they retire, they take some time off, and then after a while they really start to miss their old job or whatever, whatever about it that they really enjoyed. But
Yeah.
I always like to ask people that are retired. So do you miss it? Most times people do say no, but you get the occasional
Yeah.
person that'll be like, yeah, I kind of do miss it. But
I miss some of
okay,
the kids. I miss some of the kids.
I
Some of the
believe.
kids I got a little close to because some of the bigger cases I investigated. I got to know over the years as you're waiting for court cases to come about. It's a really difficult process, and so I miss the kids. And I miss that aspect. But I was able to, step out of that world and work. As a healer in a different realm now, in a healthier, different way, on a different aspect of it. So that's
Yeah, so
good.
that's a great transition to the main part of what I wanted to talk to you about today. So as I referenced earlier in the episode, Gretchen recently wrote a article essay on her website, and she titled the post "The Pennsylvania Dutch: Reflections on the Past and Pathways Forward." And I just want to read for I'll post a link to her to Gretchen's post in the show notes, but I want to read just the opening little bit of this essay, and then we're going to dig into it. She writes, "Traffic on the Walt Whitman Bridge was relatively light as I gazed out the passenger side window into the waters of the Port of Philadelphia below. Welcome to Pennsylvania," the GPS unit echoed my thoughts as they drifted back to my ancestors who entered this country via this port some 300 years ago. When I first read that, of course, it's the first thing you read in your essay. And I've driven over the Walt Whitman Bridge multiple times. And just like you, my family, forefathers and foremothers, sailed into that port as well 300 years ago. And it was such a great way to start off. And I was like, I got to find out where this goes. So,
Awesome.
I continue to read the whole thing, of course. Um, so, let's start with this question. What made you write this essay?
I just felt really inspired. I had just left the uh, Braucherei and Hexerei retreat of Urglaawe practitioners, and I just felt really inspired to write it. I was really moved. I had spent 5 days at the retreat, and it was just a really, I guess, a life-changing evolution for me. I mean, it was just really, it was where I really knew that I was in the right place and I was moving forward in the right way with my decision to join that guild and to apprentice with this guild. And I knew that my ancestors would be proud of my decision, and I really felt moved when I was traveling over that bridge, and I was really tired from the retreat. It was a lot of, and it was just a lot of, and I heard that GPS like ring out in that way, and I was already gazing down at that water, and it just felt really moving. When I came home and things started to settle, I just started to write. I
Yeah.
love to write, so yeah.
So we have to rewind real quickly because I'm sure there are people listening to this show and heard you mention Braucherei, Hexerei, and Urglaawe,
Yeah,
and they're probably like, "What in God's name is that?" So if we could
yeah.
give like the I don't know the elevator definition, elevator pitch definition, we'll break those down. How would you describe this Urglaawe, Braucherei, Hexerei, and any one of the three or all three?
Okay, well, let's start with the overall picture of Urglava. So Urglava is like, um, it's a religion in and of itself. So started by Rob Shriver, who on Urglava means like the original faith. So that would be the original faith of the Pennsylvania Dutch people. So we're going back to like the Palatinate of, what where our ancestors came from, what's now Germany, Switzerland, that region of of Europe. So we're talking about pre-Christian, pre the before the pre before the Christianization of that region. So there was a lot of influence of different uh, gods, goddesses, nature gods, different and other influences that came in, and it evolved over centuries with different um, religions coming in and influencing that in that region. So Urglava the original faith. So we're going back to like the pre-Christianization of the people. Um, so that's like the overall. So Urglaawe is just kind of going back to the original faith, and that's a Pennsylvania Dutch term that means that. So in the Braucherei and Hexerei Guild is practitioners of Braucherei and Hexerei within Urglaawe. So we're looking at we practice within that lens of the original faith of Urglaawe as opposed to primarily any other faith. Though we're inclusive and we welcome in anyone who wants to practice with the Christian faith or with any other faith, they're welcome within our guild. It's just that when we're together, we practice through the lens of the Urglaawe because we're under that umbrella, if that makes sense. And then if we break down the definitions of Braucherei and Hexerei, so Braucherei and Hexerei uh, are the folk magic, the folk healing practice of our people that was brought over from the Palatinate region of Europe. It was brought over to Pennsylvania. So it is. So those words were used interchangeably in a lot of regions in Pennsylvania when our ancestors settled. Hexerei was kind of taken out of context and used and weaponized against us. But it was at one point, especially in certain counties, it was used interchangeably with Hexenmeister or powwow. And other regions of Pennsylvania primarily use Braucherei, but it's used to describe the same practice. So our guild is really trying to reclaim that word Hexerei that was taken from us. So we use both, and we use both interchangeably. Though there is a small distinction between the two words, two practices within the same realm. So I'm trying to like wrap this up to make it so it's like really like understandable here. So like Braucherei, so like when I say Braucherei, we're talking about like the healing practices, like especially going out into the community, more outward. And with Hexerei, we're talking about our guild is redefining that word to reclaim it as our own, to reclaim it within our culture. That is the practices of like self-development, of self-evolution, of there's practices of going within and really doing that self-discovery and that self-work. So it's that balance because you can work out within the community or you can work within yourself. So it's really about that balance, and the practice contains both. If you look at any of the grimoires that are out there, you'll see the charms and things that are inward and outward. So it's really about both.
For a lot of people that have never heard of this, that I always run it. I mean, I'm familiar with the things you're talking about because of the way I grew up and Pennsylvania Dutch culture and all this. But for people that are outside that lens, it's really hard for people to understand that these practices that you're talking about and the beliefs and some of these healing rituals have been and are still being practiced in 2023 America.
Yeah.
I mean, and some of these are ancient. When you talk about the pre-Christianization of Europe, you're right. I mean, I've read a lot of the stuff that your group has put out and how it references this certain god or these certain things, let's say, whatever. And I mean, we're talking like the ancient Celtic peoples and these ancient Germanic peoples. And it's really crazy that our ancestors, not all of our ancestors, but some of our ancestors brought these beliefs with them to the New World in the 16 and 1700s, and it didn't die out. It was able to continue to be passed on to generations. I'm sure it's been ebbs and flows, the amount of people maybe that were practicing it and believing in it. And I know that among the Pennsylvania Dutch people themselves, like for example, my family, we didn't necessarily, I mean, my grandparents never talked about Braucherei and powwowing and stuff like that. And when I did ask my grandmother one time, she was of the opinion, this was, I guess, the family that she was raised in, that's all a bunch of nonsense or all a bunch of hooey. So, I mean, I didn't grow up with it. I never was powwowed. I didn't really necessarily know anybody that did it or had it done to them. But after I grew up and as I started doing the work that I do, man, I have run into so many people that have either been healed or have had a healing process done to them, or, and I've gotten to meet multiple people now that are actual practitioners of the faith and are actual, powwowers and brauchers. And so people out there that are listening to this, you're like, this can't be true. It's honestly out there. In fact, I think it's been preserved better here than it has back in the old country. Because when you go to Germany and you bring this aspect up of our culture, most Germans have no idea what the heck you're talking about because I guess it did eventually get squashed or drowned out in Europe as time progressed. But we, again, as often the Pennsylvania Dutch did, we created a time capsule here in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania and maintained traditions and language aspects and faith practices that were eventually went extinct back where we came from, but we were able to maintain them. So when
Yeah.
you mentioned that you grew up Catholic, at what point did you come into contact with with Urglaawe?
Okay, so I came into contact with Urglaawe probably about a year ago when I met Rob Schreiber. And so I'm a Reiki master, I'm a yoga teacher. I have always been very intuitive. And so I strayed from the Catholic faith as soon as I graduated high school and started studying world religions and saw that everything was connected. Everything was just a different cultural ways of looking at the same thing. And I really just embodied that, spirituality and that version of faith for myself, and honored people's own personal beliefs as their culture and their personal preferences, and really respected where other people came from with their own personal belief systems. And when I came into contact with Rob Shriver and we began talking, I realized that um, the way that he practiced Braucherei and Hexerei and the way the Urglaawe Guild practiced it was in alignment with my own personal beliefs and um, my own my own world views on things, and it really spoke to me, and it really felt good, and it felt like a good match. So I spent probably about 6 months just getting to know Rob and some people in the guild, and going to some of their Urglaawe celebrations and things, and it just kind of clicked. It really felt good, and then I just began my apprenticeship officially here at the Urglaawe retreat, and that's when I just knew that it was, I had chosen the right path. It was just
So now
seemed perfect.
how does that process work? So you're currently an apprentice. How long do you have to apprentice for, and like how's that system work?
1 year is my apprenticeship, but the education continues. I mean, we're of the belief that you are always learning in some way, which their belief system in that is in alignment with my own, in that. So you're always learning something. There's always something to learn from someone else, and that's a good feeling that there's always something to gather from another culture, from somebody else, or you're always expanding and moving forward.
You reference in your essay your great grandmother Libby. Uh, tell me about her. Did you get to know her, or did she
I
pass
had
away
never met
before?
her.
Okay, but when you were writing this essay, why did you bring her up?
Okay, so when I began my yoga studies and became a Reiki master, my mom just suddenly shared with me, "Oh, your great grandmother Libby well, of course it was hushed voice, Your great grandmother Libby was a healer." My mom didn't know the name for it, didn't know what it was called, but she was like, she would blow fire, like, and like she would like heal warts, and she removed the wart from my hand, like, and she would describe what she would do. She's like, she would mutter something over and she'd do this, and then she had this back room and people would knock on the door and they would come in, but like these people would call her a witch in the community, but then they'd be the first to knock on her door and come into her room, and she'd blow fire for them. And And I was like fascinated, of course, like what was she doing? Like, so like, uh, in like she would always travel down to Lancaster. Like she lived in Blair County, but her ancestors came up from like Berks County into Center County and then over to Blair County. So it's like, and but she'd always travel down to Lancaster. And my mom would always go with her, and like she like my mom never really knew what was going on. She was the only one who witnessed this. Nobody else witnessed this, but my mom was privileged to this. She couldn't talk about it, and my grandmother, who my mom's mom, still she's 97 today, silent. She won't talk to me about it. She's kind of upset that I talk about it, but like she's just like, she was of that generation that it was everything was underground at that point. It was silent. Our culture was being oppressed, and it was, to this day, she won't speak about it. Like when she heard I was talking about it, she just had an outburst. Like, my mom was not a witch. Like nobody ever, like let's calm down here. Like, but yeah, so I did my own research and discovered very quickly that, what this is back in 2010, what Libby was doing. And then I just began my research from there. And of course, back in 2010, there was fewer resources available then than there are now. So I was trying to find a powwow practitioner to teach me, and it was just like dead end, dead end, dead end, dead end. And I was reading all kinds of academic resources. I found the one written by um, oh, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, powwowing in Pennsylvania, but he wrote it at Penn State. I actually went up to Penn State to try to find him, and he had moved on to like Kutztown or something by that point. I was trying to find him to try to connect me to a powwow practitioner, and I just assumed that the practice was dead and that nobody would ever teach me, but luckily enough, it wasn't.
But you're right. During our childhood, I mean, we're around the same age. Our youth, at that point in the culture, especially with me growing up in that region, nobody talked about it, and it still was. It still had that the stigma attached to it. I mentioned what my grandmother thought about it, and that's what a lot of like our family friends were. I mean, just there was something you never talked about, and I think there was still like that stigma of, well, they're witches, in the sense of like Salem witch trial type witches. You know what I mean? Like they're legit, like in a pact with the devil or something like this. So growing up, like I had zero exposure to it, and you would hear hush things, but but I mean, it just wasn't talked about. It wasn't talked about. Period. That's why when I started seeing more and more of the Urglaawe stuff coming online and meeting other people, I'm like, well, they're really throwing the blanket off the bed here, and it's a totally different environment, of course, than what it was in the 80s and 90s. But I mean, your group has decided this is my interpretation. They've taken what was seen as a negative and trying to expose truth, of course, and the positive aspect of it too. And of course, with social media and everything now, and the ability for you guys to connect and be able to have like retreats. Like, I mean, I'm thinking like that. Like, if anybody would have tried to do that in 1986, like the cops probably would have showed up, or somebody would have called the
Yeah,
police on them, right? So
right.
I don't know. I find it absolutely fascinating. Um, so I want to. We've talked about this. I thought about this question. I want to ask you. It's a two-parter. How do you define being Pennsylvania Dutch? And the reason I ask that is because you and your belief system and the stuff we've been talking about, you break the old mold and the old definition. And so do these other Brauchers and the people that are involved in Urglaawe and a lot of the younger Pennsylvania Dutch people now that are starting to become more vocal. How do you respond to that?
um the breaking the mold of the definition. Well,
And I'll tell you, I mean, I'll let you think a little bit, but one thing, the Dutchies, us Dutchies are very stubborn, stuck in our ways, and traditional in that sense. And when things come about that don't fit the mold, they are often discarded or ch- chastised. And we're going through this renaissance in Pennsylvania Dutch culture. I truly believe this, where it's becoming more it's becoming hip to a certain aspect. People want to learn the language. People want to carry on and learn these old traditions and these old beliefs, and people are now dressing up like the Belschnickel again at Christmas time, and I
Yeah.
mean, there's all these like things that we had done for hundreds of years that in the from like post World War II up until I'd say, let's say the millennium, really we're dying away, and there's been this rebirth, this
Right.
of all things Pennsylvania Dutch. So the definitions are the old definitions, I think, are absolutely changing, and it's probably time that they did. But what would you say to that person that would say, well, you're not Pennsylvania Dutch because you're not X, right? By the old definition standards. What would your
Right.
response to that person be?
Well, the in order for a culture to move forward, it has to evolve. When I think of preservation, I think of a museum, right? A museum preserves something that's usually no longer with us. In order for our culture to move forward, we have to um, evolve forward. We have to um, be able to hold that cognitive dissonance that like we can have our traditional ways and be evolutionary, think forward, take those traditional ways and make them modern, and move our culture forward, so it survives. Um, I know that, uh, especially when it comes to like the belief system over Urglaawe, I know it's chastised in a lot of realms, and because it doesn't fit the mold of like, most of our ancestors came over here and identified as Christian. Um, most most of them probably have like a mixture of practices and beliefs of both. I mean, look at Easter, like the Easter bunny and things like, you know, um, we're a group that is inclusive and doesn't exclude. And if you look at things and how they evolve over time, um, things kind of roll forward and gather. You think of it like as a big snowball moving forward and picking up other things, and it gathers and collects, and it becomes bigger and better. Um, so that's kind of the philosophy of our group is, we find commonalities and similarities between cultures and things, and that's what we believe in moving forward. And then we've even begun, creating our own words from our own language, and stop like appropriating words from other cultures like shamanic out of the Evenki culture, because that word has been just, it was appropriated from the Evenki culture, and it's been overused to the point where people are like, it's just kind of like coined for just like anything. And it's really taking away from the spirituality and the culture of those people. So we're trying to innovate and move our culture as Pennsylvania Dutch forward. So we've created our own words in the spirit of reclaiming the word hexerai and hex for our culture. We, within the context of that word shamanic, we use the word hexic or hexish within the Urglaawe group. So we created our own Pennsylvania Dutch word for that same context of what we practice. So we're not taking from those people, and we're creating and strengthening our own culture. So we're really about innovating and moving our culture forward. And to anybody who wants to say that, well, you're not this or not that, I know who my ancestors are. I know how I was raised. I know my grandma, who doesn't want to talk about anything, hung hex signs on our barn at camp, and had scrapple in the refrigerator, and like, I know, our of the language that would come out sometimes, and how she spoke because she was exposed to Pennsylvania Dutch early on. Like um, I know who I am, and I know how I was raised, and I know what my values are. So another person's opinion of me, just because of my personal beliefs, because I go back a little bit further in history as to what I believe, and I'm more inclusive in my beliefs, I try not to let that impact me. And I practice how I feel that I want to practice, if that makes sense. And I feel that if we need to move, I feel that our culture, if it's to survive, it needs to be innovative and move forward. The resurgence of our language is amazing. I'm learning it now through the Berks County History Center, and I watch your videos, and Rob Shriver teaches a little. Learn from him. I'm soaking up all that I can. And I think it's wonderful that we have this resurgence, and but we can't be exclusive in who we're allowing to learn. We can't have cultural purity. We should be including people into our circle if we want to move forward. That's my opinion.
Yeah, so I guess the last question here in regards to this whole conversation, where do you see things going from here? Is your group growing?
Yes, yes, the group is definitely growing. We have a lot of interest in apprenticeship with our group. We're very
And does
inclusive,
that go
and
for like all ages? Do you have younger people, older people? What's like the demographics?
um, right now it's adults. We're definitely welcoming of children coming in because the future of that's the future of our culture. So I'll definitely be taking my son to different events and things, and I know some of the other members of our group, and I have been talking about organizing some kids things where we get together and do some things for the kids and introduce them to the culture and just let them play and get together and do some things. But as far as the apprenticeship, yeah, it's all ages, and you don't have to be of Pennsylvania Dutch heritage to apprentice with us. You just have to have an appreciation of our culture and want to learn. We're not exclusive in that manner. You can be of another culture altogether and join our group as long as you appreciate what we do and have a sincere interest in learning.
Yeah, it is. It is absolutely fascinating the growth that your organization has had over the last couple of years, and I see it growing more in the future, for a lot of reasons with how society's going, and the role of organized religion in a lot of younger Americans. It's just not there like it used to be, like old mainline church going. So I think these other things that are out there, these other belief systems, these other faiths, I think are very attractive to younger people. And when I say younger, I mean not necessarily like teenagers, but even like 20 something, 30 somethings, 40 somethings. And I really see your organization, because I've seen I think it will continue to grow, in a healthy way too. So I'm curious to watch, so as you guys progress. Awesome. It's really great, guys. I will link Urglaawe's website and some other sites that can gain more information for you guys that are interested in learning more, and include. I, of course, will have a link to Gretchen's essay, which goes much deeper than what we just kind of talked about. It's a really great read. It's not a long read, which I know most of you would enjoy reading. But I end every interview the same way, Gretchen. I don't know if you listen to the podcast or not, but I ask all my guests 10 quick questions that have nothing to do with
Okay.
anything. It doesn't have anything to do with anything we talked about so far in the episode. Just a little bit to get to know you a little bit better. Are you ready for your 10 quick questions?
Sure.
Okay, here we go. Number one, what is your morning drink of choice?
Oh, Pennsylvania Dutch Meadow Tea.
Okay, again, here's an opportunity for a learning opportunity here for my listeners. Describe what Meadow Tea is.
Okay, well, I make it from mints and herbs from my garden. So I pick it varies from day to day depending on what I'm feeling. Usually it's a mixture of different mints, and I boil it in water with some sugar and some honey from the local Amish farm, and then I drink it all throughout the day.
And
It's really good.
Meadow Tea is delicious. What do you do then in the winter when you don't have access to those fresh herbs anymore?
I have an indoor growing
Oh,
system
okay.
where I grow
Whoa,
a lot of
okay.
things. So I have a little indoor garden thing. But I like coffee in the morning too. So
Okay.
when
All
I'm
right.
feeling a
Yeah,
little edgy, I'll be pounding the coffee.
there was never a summer picnic at the Maidenford farm that didn't include a big pitcher of Meadow Tea or a cooler or like a big jug with iced Meadow Tea in it. My grandmother made
Yeah.
it all the time. It is so good. And it's a certain taste and flavor that as soon as you have it, like for me especially, because I don't drink it every day, even though I do have some mint growing at my house, I make it every once in a while, but not regularly. But when I taste it, it's one of those foods that just bam, it like automatically takes me back to childhood and
Yeah.
it really does. That's one flavor for whatever reason that I have strong connection with. Okay, number 2. Who is a go-to musical artist or group for you?
Bob Dylan.
Oh, we are children of the same thread. So,
Yeah.
younger Dylan, middle-aged Dylan, older Dylan, or all three?
All three. All three. But I really like Blood on the Tracks. Like
Yeah,
that album is like my go-to album.
it is
That's
a good
like,
album.
yeah.
You know, I saw him live. He was at Penn State. When was that? A couple years ago. He
Like
was like,
Eisenhower.
yeah, he was pushing
Yeah, I was
80,
there.
and I was curious to see
Yeah.
what he'd be like. Man, he played nonstop for like an hour and a half,
I
hour and
know.
45 minutes. It was just like this dude still has it. It's unreal.
Yeah, he
Unreal.
even played the guitar at the end.
Yeah, he did. I know. It's like
Mhm.
crazy. Oh, that's awesome. All right, question number 3. What movie can you watch over and over again and it never gets old?
Forrest Gump.
Oh, I have a colleague who's a history teacher that he must have seen that movie. I don't know, 1,000 times, like legitimately, probably 1,000 times. It's all like anytime we're in a conversation, he can work a Forrest Gump anecdote into the conversation. It doesn't matter what the situation, he's got one. It's kind of crazy. As soon as you said that, I thought of that. Okay, it is a great film, absolutely. All right, number 4. What is the last thing that you read?
The last thing that I read, oh, The Shaman of Oberstdorf.
Okay,
It was a thing I read for Urglaawe
okay, all right.
for my apprenticeship.
Oh, okay, all right. Number 5. What is your favorite pizza topping?
Spinach.
Spinach. Okay. Good. Good. Number 6. Laying on the beach or going for a hike?
Hike.
Absolutely. I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that. Number 7. You have invited me over for dinner. What are you making?
Probably stuffed peppers.
Okay. Do
Oh,
you like to cook, Gretchen?
yeah, I like to
Yeah.
cook a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I cook a
Stuffed
lot.
peppers. Okay, sounds good. Number 8. What is a dream vacation destination for you?
I'd like to go to Germany. I've never been there.
Yeah, to the region where we came from. It
Hmm.
is really cool, especially if you know any of your genealogy, like if you know towns where your ancestors immigrated
Yeah, I
from.
do.
There is a certain it's hard to describe the feeling when you're walking in those towns knowing that, oh man, 500 years ago or 300 years ago, like my great 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 grandfather might have been walking down this street. It's a cool, and on top of it, that part of Germany is just a really awesome place to visit, whether you have genealogy ties or not. It's really, I hope you make it someday because it's really cool.
Yeah,
Really, really is.
I plan on it. I hope I get there.
There has to be
I
like
do
an
know the towns. That's
there
what
should
I'm
be
planning.
there should be an Urglaawe heritage tour that goes back to the
There
old
should
country.
be. Yeah, yeah.
All right, question number 9. What's something you're afraid of?
This is a funny answer considering I teach wilderness survival right now, but snakes.
Snakes? No, I'm not a fan of
I'm
snakes
afraid of
either.
snakes.
Ugh, I hate snakes. Good answer. All right, last
I
question.
teach. Yeah.
What job, other than one that you've had, would you love to have?
Hmm. That's a tough one. I always wanted to be a marine biologist.
Okay.
I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was little. I like the ocean,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I just like to be. I guess that would be interesting.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Gretchen, it was an absolute pleasure getting to talk with you today and dig a little deeper on some of these questions I had for you. Um, what a crazy story you have, in a good way, not in a like a whoa, she's nuts kind of way. I've had the opportunity to talk to multiple people that are now really knee deep in the Urglaawe and the Braucherei stuff, and I know Rob, who you mentioned a couple times, him and I've talked many times, and I just find it so fascinating what you guys are doing and how it is impacting the lives of the people that are in those groups. And at every one that I've talked to, it has always been such a positive for them. And it sounds, from
Yeah.
our conversation that it was the same for you. So I just want to
Yeah.
thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for writing the piece that you did. I know that when I shared it on my social media channels, it spurred conversation among a lot of the people on there. Some good, some bad. You're going to always get that, of course.
Sure.
But it made people talk and got people thinking a little bit, maybe differently than what they normally would have. So I want to thank you for
Good.
that. I think anytime we can contribute to honest conversation, I think is important. So, Gretchen, I
Mhm.
thank you so much for coming on the show, and I look forward to talking to you again in the near future.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to Doug's Front Porch, a conversational podcast with your host, Doug Maidenford. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. 5 stars only, please. Follow along on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just look for Doug's Front Porch. Also, please feel free to tell all of your friends about the show, and I'll see you all next time on My Front Porch.